London, 1944. A city under siege. Night after night, the terrifying buzz of V-1 flying bombs, the screaming descent of V-2 rockets, thousands dead, homes destroyed, a population living in constant fear. But there was a third vengeance weapon, one that never fired a shot at its intended target. One so ambitious, so technically complex that even today it seems impossible. The V-3 Supergun, Hitler's secret weapon to obliterate London from nearly 100 miles away. A 430-foot-long cannon buried deep underground in a fortress carved from solid chalk. A weapon that would fire 600 shells per hour, 24 hours a day, reducing the British capital to rubble. This is the story of Nazi Germany's most megalomaniacal engineering project, a plot straight from a Bond villain's playbook, and the desperate Allied mission to destroy it before a single shell could be fired. To understand the V-3, we need to go back to World War I and a weapon that terrorized Paris. March 1918, the Kaiser Wilhelm gun, the Paris gun, began bombarding the Paris capital from an incredible 75 miles away. These massive Krupp artillery pieces could shoot shells into the stratosphere, the first weapons ever to do so. Parisians were shocked. How could they be under artillery fire when the German front lines were so far away? The psychological impact was devastating. But there was a problem. The enormous explosive charge needed to achieve such range caused rapid degradation of the gun barrel. After firing just a few dozen rounds, the barrel was worn out. The Paris gun was powerful but impractical. World War I ended before any improvements could be made. The concept seemed destined to the history books. But then, in 1940, German troops marching through newly conquered Paris discovered something: the original patent for a multi-chamber gun, a weapon that used sequential charges along the barrel to accelerate a projectile without the massive pressure of a single charge. This patent caught the attention of August Koinders, a brilliant German engineer and developer of advanced armor-piercing shells. Koinders saw the solution to the Paris gun's problems. What if, instead of one massive charge, you used many smaller charges spread along the length of the barrel, each one firing in sequence as the shell passed, adding velocity without the destructive pressure? In 1942, Koinders built a 20mm prototype using components from anti-aircraft guns. The first tests were encouraging. Koinders needed support from the highest levels. He presented his concept to Albert Speer, the Minister of Armaments and War Production. Speer was intrigued, and he knew Hitler would be too. By 1943, the strategic situation had turned against Germany. Allied bombers were devastating German cities. The tide of war was shifting. Hitler desperately wanted a weapon that could strike back, that could terrorize Britain as Germany was being terrorized. The V-3 would be that weapon. Hitler authorized the project immediately, committing enormous resources to what would become known by its code name, Hochdruckpumpe, high-pressure pump, a deliberately boring name to hide its true purpose. The specifications were staggering. The gun would be 430 feet long, longer than a football field. It would be smoothbore, firing a fin-stabilized 150mm shell weighing over 200 pounds. The shell would carry a 25-pound explosive charge. But here's what made it revolutionary. 32 side chambers arranged in pairs along the barrel's length. These chambers would fire solid-fuel rocket boosters in perfect sequence as the projectile passed, accelerating it to over 5,000 feet per second, faster than any conventional artillery. The Germans nicknamed it Tausendfüßler, the millipede, because those side chambers looked like the legs of a centipede. The plan? Build 2 batteries of these superguns in northern France, permanently aimed at London. Each battery would house 25 gun tubes, 50 guns in total, firing 600 shells per hour around the clock. Within weeks, Hitler believed, London would be a devastated wasteland. Britain would be forced to surrender. September 1943. In the French country near the village of Mimoyecques, just 93 miles from London, construction began on the most ambitious military engineering project of the war. The Germans chose a limestone hill in the Pas-de-Calais region, the same area where V-1 and V-2 sites were being built. The location was perfect, close to the English Channel, solid chalk bedrock that could be excavated and reinforced. The project was codenamed Wiese, Meadow. The notorious organization Todt was ordered to plan and execute the construction. Between 1,200 and 1,500 workers descended on the site. Some were skilled German engineers from Schachtbau and Tiefbau, specialists in underground construction, but most were forced laborers, Frenchmen, Italians, Russians, Poles, prisoners of war and conscripted civilians, bussed in from prison camps to work 12-hour shifts in brutal conditions. They dug deep into the chalk hillside, carving out a vast underground fortress. 10 inclined gun shafts, each 450 feet long, angled at 50 degrees to achieve the perfect trajectory to London. Railway tunnels 100 feet underground to bring in supplies and ammunition. Bunkers for the 1,200-man garrison, electrical generators, ventilation systems, communications centers. A whole military base hidden beneath the earth. The gun shafts themselves would be protected by a massive reinforced concrete dome over 17 feet thick. The Germans believed it could withstand any conventional bombing. The construction was staggering in scope. Thousands of tons of chalk excavated, hundreds of tons of steel and concrete poured, a railway tunnel system stretching 650 yards, ammunition storage bunkers, medical facilities, everything needed to sustain continuous bombardment of London. But the Allies were watching. British reconnaissance aircraft had been photographing the Pas-de-Calais region for months. Something strange was happening at Mimoyecques. Aerial photographs showed 2 railway tracks that seemed to disappear into the hillside, clear signs of massive excavation, unusual geometric patterns. The Allies didn't know exactly what the Germans were building, but the scale of construction suggested something significant. At first, intelligence analysts thought it might be a V-2 rocket site. The location and fortification level fit that theory, but they couldn't be sure. Winston Churchill, already alarmed by V-1 and V-2 attacks, ordered the site to be bombed. If the Germans were devoting this many resources to it, it had to be destroyed. Starting in late 1943, the RAF began bombing raids on Mimoyecques. But the bombs did little damage. The Germans were building underground, and conventional bombs couldn't penetrate deep enough. Churchill authorized more extreme measures. The Americans proposed Project Aphrodite, a desperate experimental plan. The idea was to pack a B-17 bomber with 10 tons of explosives, fly it toward the target with a crew, then have the pilot and co-pilot bail out while a second aircraft took over remote control, guiding the explosive-laden plane directly into Mimoyecques. It was essentially a manned cruise missile, and it was incredibly dangerous. On August 12, 1944, Lieutenant Joseph P. Kennedy, Jr., elder brother of the future president, volunteered for a Project Aphrodite mission. His bomber was packed with 21,000 pounds of explosives. The plan was to bail out over England, leaving the drone to be guided to the target. But the explosives detonated prematurely over Suffolk. The entire aircraft disintegrated in a massive fireball. Kennedy and his co-pilot were killed instantly. Project Aphrodite was a tragic failure. But unknown to the Americans, the mission was already unnecessary. While the Americans were experimenting with explosive drones, the British had developed something far more effective: the Tallboy bomb. Designed by Barnes Wallis, the genius behind the famous bouncing bomb, it was unlike any weapon before it. Weighing 12,000 pounds with a streamlined aerodynamic shape, the Tallboy wasn't designed to explode on impact. Instead, it was designed to penetrate deep underground before detonating, creating what Wallis called an earthquake effect. The shock wave would collapse tunnels and shatter foundations from within. Wallis engineered the perfect nose cone, strong enough to penetrate 50 feet of earth, yet aerodynamic enough to remain stable while approaching the speed of sound. He angled the tail fins just 5 degrees to create spin stabilization. It was a masterpiece of engineering. On July 6, 1944, Lancaster bombers from the RAF's elite 617 Squadron, the Dam Busters, flew a precision mission to Mimoyecques. They dropped 16 Tallboy bombs. The results were devastating. The bombs penetrated deep into the chalk hillside before exploding. The shock waves collapsed tunnel sections, foundations cracked, bunkers were damaged beyond repair. The entire complex was rendered unusable. The Germans tried to salvage the project, but by late July, with Allied forces advancing from the Normandy beachhead, they realized it was hopeless. Mimoyecques was abandoned. On September 4, 1944, Canadian troops overran the fortress. They were stunned by what they found: the remains of a vast underground installation unlike anything they'd seen. At first, they thought the Germans had been building an electromagnetic railgun. It took weeks for Allied intelligence to piece together the true purpose of the site.